So good afternoon, everyone. I'm very happy to be, what shall I say, back here in the seat here in front of you after my talk on Tuesday. On Tuesday, I was trying to give a kind of general presentation of what I called an alternative narrative of Tibetan history, early Tibetan history, according to a burned text. You'll find the name of the text, we'll get back to that, but I'll give a short recapitulation of what I said then. But today we are going to actually really do some, what shall I say, some real classwork. We're going to go very carefully through a short, fairly short passage from the text I presented on Tuesday. And I will comment on it, and I will certainly be very happy if there's anyone among you who can come up with any supplementary information. My presentation this afternoon will end with a question, and if anyone is able to answer it, I shall be extremely grateful, or suggest something which could point towards an answer. I shall be very, very grateful indeed, because at the moment I'm a bit stuck. So I've called this talk a Yungdrung Burn description of Mount Kailash. The importance of Mount Kailash for Hindus as well as Buddhists is too well known to need further elaboration. Lots of books on Kailash, travel books and guide books, and the history of exploration by Westerners in that area, and so on. There's quite a big literature. I'm not going to even touch upon that. Thanks to the publication in 1989 by Namkhenobu Rinpoche and Ramon Prats of a text which for short is called the Gang Tse Karchak, so the guide to the holy snow mountain Tse, Kailasha, published in 1989. We know that the Bonpos too, not just the Buddhists, not only do they consider this mountain as sacred and very important in their own narrative of their history, but also that they have texts of their own that describe it from their particular perspective. Now, this Gang Tse Karchak was actually, it's not a very old text. It was written in the 1840s by Bonpo Lama, Karo Drupwang, Tenzing Rinchen, was born in 1801, lived to 1861. But there are also quite a few other texts in the Burn tradition which describe in one way or another this mountain Gang Tse. Now, for the sake of convenience, the text from which the excerpt which you have been given, handed out a copy of the translation that we're going to look at. The text from which this is taken will be, I will refer to it as the Drakpa Lingdrak. It does have a much longer title, but Drakpa Lingdrak, or even just the Lingdrak, is enough. Let me just recapitulate the main points from my talk on Tuesday regarding this text. So I just want to remind you that in Western literature, the first reference to this text was made by something Karme in his translation and study of the Lekshö Tse, the Treasury of Good Sayings, which was written in 1922 by the Burn scholar Shardza Tashi Gyaltsen, who lived from 1859 to 1935. In his bibliography, Karme listed a manuscript preserved in the Oslo University Library, which was a manuscript copy of this particular text, the Drakpa Rinchen Lingdrak. The text is repeatedly quoted by Sharza in the lecture Tso. And in this text, which we shall now examine, will be on the basis of 4 available versions, 4 available manuscripts. The author and the date of the text is unfortunately not known, although the French Tibetologist Anne-Marie Blondeau has convincingly argued that it was probably composed by someone in the Ma, Ramata Ma, the Ma clan in central Tibet in the 12th century. In other words, as Tibetan historical texts go, it is fairly old. Now, although the Dragpa Lingdrak deals with a variety of topics which are outlined on Tuesday, ranging from the geography of the world to the coming of the first king to Tibet, and finally, and most importantly, the establishment of Buddhism in Tibet during the reign of Trisong Detsen, the passage which we shall now look at presents a description of Mount Tse and its surroundings, a description which has several unusual features. We also find a somewhat abbreviated version of this passage, explicitly referred to the Dragpa Lingdrak, in an abbreviated and metric form in the History of the Burn Religion, published by the Burn scholar Pelden Tsultrim in 1972. He is a modern scholar who passed away some years later in India. And occasionally I will refer to this translation. So, if you have got a copy of the translation, I think there's also, after the translation, I mean, there is also the Tibetan text. You don't need to refer back and forward. You'll get sort of lost going from one to the other. But for your reference, the Tibetan translation is there, I think. And you will find also noted all the different, am I mistaken? There should be a Tibetan text at the very back of it. Is there? There is not? There should be. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, but that's just for your reference. You know, you can take it back home and you can spend the evening poring over it and and judging it. So in the translation anyway, which is what we're going to refer to now, you will see that there are some headings in square brackets and in bold that's not in the text. It's just something I have inserted to make the different topics which are dealt with one by one to make it clearer, that's all. So starting now with what it says about Mount Tse, I will read it and then I will comment a few things. So it goes like this. Further, as for the wonder which is worthy of fame here in Zambuling, in the sky, exactly above the center of Zambuling, is the snow mountain Tse. Here I would just like to add that Pelden Tsultrim that I referred to just a moment ago, he renders it slightly differently. He says, above the snow mountain that is in the center of, which means in between Shangshung and Tibet. So quite often there are slightly different phrasings. So there is the snow mountain Tse, and to the east of it is the lake Mapang. And now comes the surprising thing. It says, both are in the sky. Both are in the sky. It says, Namkala Yö, Namkala Yö. Then it goes on. The base of Mount Tse is like the Armolika stone. The peak is on a level with the 4 trances. Now remember, we are now in the sky, Namkala. And then it says the base is like Armolika stone. I struggled a bit to understand what was meant by this armolika. If any one of you have got your own idea about that, I'll be very interested. Dan Martin, who is a very good scholar and known, I'm sure, to several of you here. Well, I know he's known to several of you, but maybe to many of you. He explained to me that the armolika stone is the stone platform that upholds Indra's throne in the heaven of the 33 gods on top of Mount Meru. Maybe the word is related to the word arka, which you find in Yeshke's dictionary, meaning marble. That's just a hunch from my side. And the peak is on the level of the 4 trances. A variant of that is that the peak is above the 4th trance. And this refers, of course, to the standard Indo-Tibetan Buddhists, Hindu Buddhists mythology of the gods of the highest arupa dhatu, the highest level in the cosmos, which is inhabited by these very sort of spiritual and rarefied class of gods, which each of them sort of dwell in one of the 4 trances. So then it goes on to say, that mountain and lake, which are thus, remain even at the time of the destruction of the world age in mid-air. And there's a very curious image, which I hope I've understood correctly. They remain even at the time of the destruction of the world age like a bucket suspended by a rope. So you imagine a bucket hanging, like in a well maybe, suspended by a rope. So Gangtise is suspended in the midair in that way. Not destroyed by fire, water, and wind, firm and everlasting. That gives me the association of ideas that here Gangtise is given the same attributes to some extent of Vajrasana, Dojiden, which is also believed to be in the center of the world and which is not destroyed at the end of the Kalpa, at the world age. It is not destroyed by fire, water, or wind. It remains until the next world appears. Or it could also remind one, a little bit, sort of going a little bit further afield, of the eternal city of Kashi, Varanasi, the old word Kashi, Kashi, which also remains when the world is destroyed at the end of the Kalpa. Then Kashi remains. It's the holy city of Shiva and it cannot be destroyed. Now comes really what I will return to at the end, which is really so surprising. It says, directly below them, we have to understand on the ground, directly below them is the snow mountain called Yapakshara, which people call the snow mountain Tise, Gangtise, and Lake Madre, known as Mapham. I'll comment a little bit these 2 new names which pop up here, the Yapakshara and the Lake Madre. But what we see here is that there is, Gangtise is in the sky. Directly underneath it, on the ground, is another mountain, which is actually called Yapakshara, according to the text, but the text says people refer to it, nevertheless, they refer to it as Gangtise. And there is a lake, which is actually, should be called Madre, but people refer to it as Mapham. So you've got a double set of Tise and Mapham. There's one set, mountain and lake in the sky, and then immediately below, there's another set which are known as Madre and Mapham also. Which are known as Tise and Mapham also, but which actually have got their own names. As for these names, there's Yapakshara. If anyone has any special information about it, I'd be very interested. It does turn up in the context of Shangshung as supposedly an old name, a more ancient name of Gangtise. It's referred to, explained as such, that it is the old name for Gangtise. I can't say anything more about that, actually. And as for Madre, this is actually the Tibetan rendering of Sanskrit anavatapta, which means not heated, Madre. And it's understood, the Sanskrit name of the lake Anavatapta is understood, the etymology, as being the fact that it is lying in the shade and hence not heated by the sun. And usually confused in texts with Manasarovar. Mapham is Manasarovar, but it's written in different ways, as you can see from the Tibetan text, and the etymology actually in Tibetan is a bit uncertain. Here I have used the spelling which you find in what I consider to be the best manuscript, with a pa, but actually sometimes it's also simply written with dao pangapang, meaning a lap, the lap in the part of the body. So we continue from here. We now have these double set of lake and mountain. Now we return to the heavenly Tse, and it goes on to say, the snow mountain is like a well-proportioned stupa. Lake Mapham is like a laid-out mandala. Because in their actual essence, they are the lake and snow mountain of enlightenment, so again a reference, let's say a parallel to Vajrasana, they are the place where all the Shenrap, this is a Bön text, of course, Yungrung Bön, so here we have to understand in this particular context of Yungrung Bön, Shenrap has the same role as Shakyamuni. So the Buddhas, you might say, if this had been a Buddhist text, it might have said where all the Buddhas of the past, present, and future become fully awakened. Exactly as at Vajrasana, where is the place where all the Buddhas have to go and sit and meditate to attain enlightenment. So here you see actually this mountain, this combination of the mountain and the lake together have exactly the same function and is described really in the same way as Vajrasana, Dorje Den, in the Buddhist tradition. And then it says, further, since the snow mountain Tse, in the manner of a male deity, holds the lake like a female consort in its lap. So there is the justification for the spelling Dao Pangapang, but that's not the way the best text actually spells it, but other texts do spell it in that way. The lake is known as Mapham. The distance across the lake is 50 leagues. The Tibetan word here is paktse, and I just loosely translated by league to indicate it's quite a long distance. The Sanskrit, paktse actually translates the Sanskrit word yojana, which is like, let's say, like a mile. It's a certain length, quite a long distance. And we will see quite soon there are other units of other measurements as well of length, which will crop up in this text. So the distance across the lake is 50 leagues. The circumference is 200 leagues. Looking at the lake from the east, one sees it as a semicircle of white color. Looking at it from the north, as a square of reddish-green color. Looking from the west, as a reddish-gray circle. And looking from the south, as a blue triangle. So I'm sure all of you immediately you see here the cosmological implications, which are reflected in the lake. You've got the shapes, at least. The colors are a bit sort of strange here. You know, what is reddish green, for example? Marjang, I'm not very sure. That doesn't matter. The point is you've got the semicircle, you've got the square, you've got the circle, you've got the triangle, and corresponding to the 4 continents surrounding Mount Meru. With exactly as we would expect in the south, this is a triangle, this is Jambudvipa. So the lake is like a mirror of our entire world system, you might say. So it emphasizes at least this cosmological importance. But we are not on the ground. Remind you, we are up in the sky. Then the text goes on to describe a kind of sacred geography surrounding this mountain and lake. So it says, on the north side of Lake Mapham in the sky is the hill called Shimpe. It does not fly up to heaven above. It does not fall down to earth below, but remains in midair. Actually remains in midair. It says here, Barnangla ne. Barnangla ne. It remains in midair. On its peak are the 7 eternal houses of the Kyung bird, Cha Kyung. And there are various versions of this. It's not very clear exactly what this refers to, but it's a reference to the peak of this mountain, which is associated with the Kyung. It's also associated in other textual versions with states of deep meditation. Directly below, on the ground, is the fragrant incense mountain, the Puri Ngeden. So again, you see, there is a mountain up in the sky, which is the Shimpe to the north of Mapang, and exactly underneath on the ground is a parallel mountain known as Puri Ngeden. So here you see they really have different names. There's a lot to be said about this Puri Ngeden, but it translates actually a Sanskrit name of a mountain which you find in Hindu mythology, Gandhamadana, which is in Hindu mythology is supposed to be to the east of Meru. Never mind, here it is to the north. Renowned for its fragrant forests, according to the Sanskrit texts. So, Gandha Madana indicates exactly this pleasant smell. Otherwise, this Mount Puri Ngeden is quite well known from other Bön sources as well. And I could actually refer to a very interesting article by Roberto Vitali here on the certain items of regal items of the Shangshung kings, which we'll not go into at all here, but they're in the traditional legendary geography of Shangshung. This mountain Puri Ngeden does turn up, and sometimes it's called Tsine Yul Puri Ngeden also. So there's many questions there, but at least the mountain is quite well documented in other sources as well. Now, having established now one lake and 2 mountains on the 2 levels, we will from now on stay on the level of midair, right? So we forget about what's on the ground now. So it goes on to say, if one continues 20 leagues to the north, on the level with the peak of that mountain, the Puri Ngeden, suspended in mid-air, there's a cliff known as having golden bird shelters, Sergi Chachipchen. Being on the level with the 33 gods, the traditional group of Vedic gods, also in Buddhism, and taken on by Bön as well. Being on a level with the 33 gods, it is supported in midair by wind, being simultaneously borne up and pressed down. So again, you see here, there's this idea of a mountain, here a cliff, a druck, being suspended because there's equal pressure upwards and downwards, so it just remains sort of floating in mid-air. The shape of that cliff is that of 4 interlocked swastikas, Yungdrung. Its circumference is 50 leagues, its height 3.5 leagues. It is encircled along its base by 1,000 minor cliffs, like a kind of court of smaller cliffs surrounding the majestic cliff in the center. And then we proceed. Now we've gone 20 leagues to the north. If one proceeds 20 leagues from there to the east, there is the tree called the bright tree. I just translate it like that, Sale Jempa. Maybe it can be translated differently also, but the bright tree. Its roots seem to go downwards 1 earshot. The term here is Gyangdrak, which actually translates Sanskrit krosha. And you have actually in 1 yojana, 1 paktse, you've got 4 krosha, you've got 4 gyangdrak. And I translate that earshot, as far as the sound can reach your ear. And then again you can have smaller units as well. You can have the length of an arm span, that will also turn up here. 500 arm spans to a krosha. So if an arm span is this much, then I guess a yojana should be 2,000 like this. So it's like maybe 2 kilometers or something like that, according to the text here. So if one proceeds 20 leagues from there to the east, there's a tree called the Sale Jempa, its roots, etc. We've seen that. As for the level of its branches, there are like 7 stages. You have to imagine sort of 7 rows of branches coming out from the stem. And at the base of that tree are 1,000 smaller trees surrounding it. It also has its own court of minor trees. Then, still continuing now in midair, we go 20 leagues further to the east, is the pond flowing gently, Delji Bappa. One would think that if something is flowing, it's not a pond, but it says Tsu from Tso. So Tsu, a small lake, so a pond, is the pond Delji Bappa. This again renders Sanskrit Mandakini, which refers in Sanskrit to a river, meaning going or streaming slowly. It's actually a name of one of the arms of the Ganges flowing through the valley of Kedarnath, is known as the Mandakini, and it is also a term which is used, I think that's quite interesting, we'll get back to that, is used in Sanskrit for the heavenly Ganges, the Ganges which can be seen in the sky as the Milky Way, and then, you know, falls down through Shivas here and down to earth and becomes the river Ganges. It can also be known as the Mandakini. So there's this pond. On each side of the square, we have to understand the square-shaped pond. It measures 50 leagues, hence the circumference is 200 leagues. The shores of that lake are bordered by lotuses, and then there is this word, if someone can help me, I'm very happy, Pema Halo, Pema Halo. I translated it tentatively as lotus marshmallows. It seems that halo can designate a particular flower, which is the marshmallow flower. And these flowers, these lotuses and lotus marshmallows, pemahalo, they are described, they have stems like plow beams, so they're really big, with leaves as thick as the hide of a buffalo or a wild yak, with circumference of 13 finger spans, to. I suppose a finger span, a to, must be understood in this way. Is it, or is it? Yeah, yeah, exactly. So it's pretty big. And then it specifies the circumference of 13 finger spans of a man, a human, at the time when human life lasts 100 years. So it's a sort of ideal human being, fully grown, healthy, strong person whose life is expected to last 100 years. So that size of to. Then sums up, it says, the mountain, lake, cliff, tree, and pond, which are thus suspended in mid-air, except by those who are cleansed of their impurities and have magic feet, they can be seen by no one else. So they are there, but you can only see them if you have cleansed of your impurities, and you have you also need to have magic feet. Chilki Kangpa. Now, the geography has been described, but there are also some inhabitants. At that cliff, tree, lake, and pond, Rapten, the elephant of Indra, the ruler of the gods, stays with his entourage. The height of Rapten is 2.5 leagues. It's quite big. His circumference is 7 leagues. 7 paktse. He is surrounded by an entourage of 1,000 lesser elephants. Their color is that of ashes. They have beautiful shape and crystal jewels on their heads. They have supernatural knowledge and magic power, Zutril. At the break of dawn, they pay homage to the elephant Rapten. Then I have put here in parentheses autumn and. You can actually just disregard that. That's my speculation. That elephant and his entourage dwell in spring, I supposed it was autumn and spring, by the tree Salejumpa and the cliff Jachipchen. Now the reason I supposed it's autumn is that all the different texts have got different variants here of their sort of migration, how these elephants migrate here on this geographical area in mid-air. For example, one text says, in autumn and spring they stay by the tree Salejumpa, in winter at the cliff Jachip, and in summer they stay by the pond Deluchen. The other one says, it is explained that in spring they stay underneath the tree Salejumpa, in summer they stay by the pond Delbap, in autumn they stay by the 8,000 surrounding smaller ponds, and in winter they stay at the cliff Jachipchen. So there are, there are all sorts of different explanations of their movements, but the point is they sort of have a kind of seasonal migration, all these elephants. And then it sort of sums up, and it says that place is the place where the teacher himself made the division into the 9 ways of Bön. So that is a very important division in Bön doctrine, that the doctrine can be grouped into 9 so-called vehicles, tekpa. Usually tekpa can also be, it can maybe be understood also as path, but here it is certainly a vehicle, and there's a very important book by David Snellgrove, which sort of opened up the study of Yungdrung Bön, called The 9 Ways of Bön. But this ranges from magic and prognostication and so on through all the different fields of learning and spiritual knowledge, and right up at the very pinnacle to the practices of Dzogchen. So all this was taught by the teacher here in mid-air. Even now, the gods called those who delight in magic appearances and those who have power over the magic appearances of others. The two categories of very sort of ethereal gods, which are well known from Buddhist cosmology. Having descended, they offer music and disport themselves there. They bathe in the pond and so on. So, yeah, there are many different versions actually in Burn tradition as to where these 9 ways were actually taught. But at least in this text, it says that they were taught at the celestial or the supra-terrestrial mountain of Tse. And then we go back to the sort of ground level. And it says, further, the so-called Tse and Mapham, which can be seen by everyone nowadays, are certainly at the center of Zambuling. That snow mountain which can be seen, we have to understand we're talking about that. That snow mountain which can be seen is called Yabakshara, the lake Madra, the same that was said initially, right? From Tse and Ngeden, which are in midair, there falls into that lake, in other words, the Madra on the ground, a waterfall invisible to men. And then comes an explanation of why the lake which is on the ground, where there's waterfall which is invisible to us, why it is called, this lake is called Madra. It says, as to how that is, because many Nagas come to bathe in it, as it neither freezes nor boils, that I've translated numinous, or you could say holy lake, Tso Nyen, the small spelling error in Tso, should be M-S-H, sorry about that. That numinous lake is known as not heated, Madra. That ends the actual description of Tse and of the holy Mapham lake on both levels and the surrounding geography. The text goes on to describe the rivers which flow from this lake, but that's another question, and I'm not going to go into that. Now, this description of Mount Tse and its surrounding geography, it posits a symmetry between a mountain, actually 2 mountains, and a lake, which are visible to everyone on the ground, and a mountain and a lake, and certain other geographical elements, which are suspended in midair, only visible to those who are cleansed of their impurities and have magic feet. Now, this neat scheme is somewhat complicated by the fact that, as the text notes, people tend to refer to the mountain and lake on the ground by the names which should, according to the text, strictly speaking, be reserved for their mid-air counterparts. There is, however, a physical link between the 2 levels provided by the waterfall, the Chubab, which descends from the 2 mountains in midair to the lake on the ground, as explained at the end of the passage which we have studied. Now, here comes the real question, the challenge, which I have not been able to answer. What is the origin of this very peculiar cosmographic scheme? Well, to some extent, we can maybe map it. In the personal communication to me, Dan Martin has pointed out that the cosmological scheme outlined in the passage here appears also in a Buddhist text called in Sanskrit the Loka Prajñapti. It's a kind of survey of the world, of Loka. The whole text is not available in Sanskrit, but there is a Tibetan translation found in the Tenjur. And there are certainly other texts as well, both in Buddhist sources and also in the Hindu Puranas and elsewhere, that would be relevant to study. This, in particular, the Loka Prajnapti, is a lead that I have started now to explore, but by no means finished. But what is clear to me is that the idea of a double Kailasha is not to be found there. But you do find most of these other elements and indications of distances, 20 yojanas, and so on and so forth. The only thing which we can perhaps, which is a kind of lead to this idea of the two levels, is the particular element of a river descending from heaven, or as here, from mid-air, to the ground, which I would say is very likely, almost certainly inspired by the myth of the descent of the Ganga from heaven to earth. But that's as far as I have been able to go, and I would be extremely interested if anyone has any idea or any reference to any clue at all which could help us to understand how this idea of the double layer of the holy mountain of Kailasha and the holy lake of Manasarovar, how that has actually been created. Thank you very much. Yeah. Don't ask me a question about this now because I've confessed my ignorance, but please, any input would be really welcome.
다 거리 때서 가도 주고 자고 요래 밀라르바 거리 때서 펴주 신에 밀라르바 펴고 진짜 지렸으나 아니 말바 로자가 되니 다 검지어서 네자 친구 네다 유자 친구 네네 로마도 되나 까 로든 지서 또 치기지 거리 되는 되면 댐쪽이네 인스제제 까나 여자 제가 말아봐 펴고 되니 말아보는 거 맞다고 다고 그러면 되니까지 체제 중제대 유튜브에 아니 이제는 망쇼 수치요 누가까지 치요 되니 죽음까지 치요 세바까지 타라토도 치인다고 또다 디게디 가서 가르쳐서 공개하고 무슨 얘기요 다 용도 망고 요래 다들 이제 그 치라 디중시기 초대 요래 된도다 나를 보여주는 다 밀라기 콜라더니 밀라르바가 나다 나온 비해당 나시 제바이나 아니지 전부도 되네 까지바니 다 되는 까지바랑 라고 이 미치데 밀라르바니 되니 파도 툰뉴바도 주주도 냥도 똑바 아니 대사 먹고 되니까 제시 요래 찡미디 미네 그거는 노라 그거는 나라고 개발가 노라 되니 흉이난다 주답이난다 가리나 쿵뚝사데 야갈로 쿵뚝사 메나 아니 가서 세모 말이 공로 요 말이 이제 비추 첨부 얘기지 다 딘데기 런처 요딩이 직수를 사제된다 사뱅기 다근데 도도르가토기 까노바노지 사뱅기 dom수라에 놀라 단데기 까지바도 아니 그거가 nomba 그때 기세도 마방기 토다 카부치원난 제텔라 이니 사뱅기가 봐요 이네 존재 아니 까지다 아니 사제 바라라 이생 문제지 좀 나오나 가버니 좀 문제죠 나사를 차샤나 샤마군디 시바 다만 이제 누가기 경화선제 도제 콘담베 가봐 근데 마 타마다 돼서 까차 이스 까차 또 정말 까차 내가 체제 뭐 정말 있다디야 정말 나발라 라데티 아니 지금 중자 제가 나와 있어요 콩비 찍도 계획 구주 고다 되바라더니 까차 이제 누가 나눠서지 근데 두스네지요 이제 찍는데요 다니버디 녀마이나 이스디 남바도 못해봐 힌두 니가게네지 친한 투몽게네 시기요 내가 지금 그저 숨지나라 내석의 라자도 차고 내가 디슨 제가 드리고요 소마건 제가 이고요 근데 대비 주제가 되고요 다 지금 그저 겨주 자장 나네 깨자 사바치 가르쳐보자 젠게네 이스 제부빨기 네 시바 마체 되네 되라 네기 지다지 아니 대동나 잡jor다 문진데 수비제요 잡jor다 가서 덴베로도 수비제 거리와 슈인 도지스는 되게 되네 아니 지금 그저 구축 공직 이스데 코리아가 뭐지 따로 코진 지금 그저 구축 공직라 되네 콩기 집에 되게 넣어라 되네 젠비 네 덴베게 아니 로키도 전체데 내로 차가지 두스 되네 송게다 땡사로 봐 근데 만들다라 봐 bombe다 가사간 구지라트 젠트가 용제로 봐 아니 근데 이스데 젠비 네 덴베게 되네 정체도 공로 쉐로 지스네들 제가 먹고 먹는데 내주 젠스가 두시 레고요 다 단답하나 젠 아니 젠게 가서 젠게 뜻사데 뜻세가 대바 단어스고 요 젠게 꼬니 요 시게 거리와 주인도 지금 그런 동사도 그런 가발이나 뜻세기 치기 단젠라라세 다젠스면 사자잖아 다 단젠라라한테 뒤치고 건바 되게 술 다가 요스나 부자는 다가 요스 너비 맞군요 샵둥 나왔는 게 출시 제도 지동 부자 주주라니스 받으러 봐 샵둥이 올려요 나 너무 있나 나리 거든 그 친구도 키고비 요마 근데 그런도 게제 그런 것도 단제 다 주주라니 손게다 걔네가 차가운 온데 아니 야마 제게 두바이 게 그거 맞게 두지 진짜 사는 거 이 다가서 이세된 대백이 니도 다가지게 먼저 로겐바기 시험받을 정도 로송도 시행하삼지 두시에 다 단답도 디스코는 냥히 지게 먹고요 다 디난다 반남 로축단 민이라 다 디스코라 아니 냥히 제쇼르지 인지 게이 노라 아니 뉴딜랜드 케바 알렉스 매케스니 되게 is called the share country, Yahi Mongo Chiji, the getting a castle membership and not as. Then this is the young chief combatant. How about the Purangi Korja George, little Samata, Jeva Yuva, and Dembe Jinda Inge, and it Logibus. Mustang Logibu, and Kada Logibu, and it's Nebemba, and Dus Konatongsha. Then on the Bubi, Kawachiki Logibu, the Chugi to me is Kawachiki Mari, Gantarian, Bubi Gete. 아니 근데 그거 땡기는 내가 거기는 이거는 용계 상관도 등유로 하는 게 답도 지금도 주시 담반에 되게 된시 봐도 아니 로마들 직도나 아니 공격지게 아니 공격지게 등유난 게 아니 기본 중에 봐 가다 아니 오늘 계속 계속을 다들 페이지 더 받아로 그다음에 페이지 계속 개가 진짜 이게 두수 거면서 이 다라스 대화처럼 등에 다라스 멤버시가 나왔어. 시에나다 빼면서 몽부시지요. 네 고당 지고 시에나. 다다나 감 충분히 배나 범보이나자 남바이 네 고가 윤도 띵 깔깔티 세투 산나나딘 돔 제스라저 사 카시에서 파이네 이제 봐도 경자 체미요. 다바 두고 get는데 다 두시에 고나 대선 때문에 제공 이게 말이야. 어다 니도 텐데 요리 다가스게 가군지 지나세요. Ani, thank you very much. I did some addition. You say thank you.